This man is the reason you can't stop binge watching. In 1997, he founded ReplayTv, a company that rivaled TiVo and challenged the traditional TV industry. His company would pioneer streaming and allow streams to be shared across the internet. He would go on to battle TiVo, and a bout that he would eventually lose after TiVo went public. But this wouldn't be a complete loss. He sold ReplayTv for $120 million and would go on to found the company that would change the way we watch TV, Roku. But who is this man, and what did he understand about our brains that helped him to build a company that would change the way we consume television forever?
Anthony Wood, thanks for sitting down.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Anthony Woods was born in Manchester, England, but grew up mostly in Texas. From an early age, Woods took a love for computer programming. He was writing his first piece of software on a TRS-80. He would mix his love for software and his hunger to build businesses to start a company called Sunrise, a company that sold hardware and software to Amiga. This was a company that pretty much was owned by Commodore. So instead of going to class, Woods was shaking hands and doing business deals. But the first version of that company would not last long, and Woods would eventually sell that company to start his second company, IBAN. And this was around the 2000s, so this was an obvious play to take advantage of the dot-com boom. But unlike most dot-com companies during that time, Woods would eventually sell IBAN for $36 million. Not too bad. But wait a minute, what does this have to do with streaming and binge watching? And how do we get to Roku? This is where things get interesting. Woods made a bold bet and took all of the money he made from the sale of IBAN and reinvested it back into a new venture. This is when Woods would take his first foray into streaming. He started ReplayTv. Why? Well, because he said he was tired of missing Star Trek episodes. Duh. No. That was seriously the reason why.
I mean, this is a pretty simple idea, but it was novel back then. Like, oh, I want to record every episode of Star Trek, not just the one that's next Thursday, but I want to just record each episode.
But ReplayTv wasn't the only one of its kind. There was a pretty familiar competitor, one that we all know, TiVo. Remember TiVo? And oddly enough, they both released on the same day, at the same time, at the same technology expose show. Like, that's pretty wild. So ReplayTv was a super solid company. It was even able to pull in big investors like Mark Andreessen. They were set to partner with consumer electronic giant Philips, but TiVo would basically undercut them and pay Philips to partner with them. So instead of Philips funding ReplayTv to help them build the hardware, TiVo would just pay Philips to help them make it. I mean, you can't blame them on that deal. But all hope was not lost for Woods and ReplayTv. They would eventually partner with Panasonic before one of the most unfortunate events in the tech industry would happen. The dot-com bubble burst. Bankers got scared and pulled out, and Woods would be forced to sell. And yes, it was for $120 million, but it was less than what they made in fundraising. So essentially, it was a net loss. But what I love about this story is Woods' tenacity. He just had this strong conviction that streaming will be the next wave of television, even in the face of people telling him that no one would ever care about streaming.
It was amazing how many people thought it was a bad idea. People would say things like, no one wants to pause live TV. Why would you want to do that?
He never let any of that stop him. No, it was his fuel. It would be the fuel he would use to begin his next big venture, into Roku. The year is 2002, and Woods had one thing on his mind for Roku: make it the operating system for TVs. Yeah, that was a pretty audacious goal, and he knew it. The company started as a device company, so it would sell setup boxes to consumers. But in 2007, something happened. A chance encounter, if you will.
Not that I re-met Reed, I maintained our relationship. And I would check in every once in a while and say, some version of, are you guys ready to do a streaming video player yet? Because when you are, I want to make it for you.
Roku would start out owned by Netflix. Reed Hastings would call on Woods because he wanted Woods to help him build out what would eventually be Netflix's streaming service. But this would take some time, They understood that it was not a quick process. Woods would actually ask Reed Hastings if he could build Roku on the side while he was working at Netflix. They both knew that the timing wasn't just yet right for full-fledged streaming. But where differences started to arise was when Woods wanted to push more of an operating system for the TV, while Reed Hastings was okay with just having different apps. And where the even bigger issue was starting to arise was that Netflix was finding it hard to get the rights to the content it would attempt to stream. I mean, companies were like, why would we give you the right to make money off of our content? Woods would even attempt to reach out to one of the more prominent people during the time, Steve Jobs. He sent an email to Jobs to see if he was interested in collaborating with Netflix, to which Jobs replied no. I mean, we all know how closed off Apple can be. But the reason was because he heard that Netflix was building a competitor to Apple TV. So why would he? And with that, in 2007, Reed Hastings would pull the plug. But just like in previous times, Woods would not walk away empty-handed. Netflix would eventually invest $6 million into Roku for equity in the company. But after Reed Hastings decided he didn't want to be in the crossfires between competing hardware companies, Netflix would sell their shares to Menlo Ventures. I mean, this thing was a pretty big mess, but to be honest, that was a really smart move on Reed Hastings' end. Over the next few years, Woods would continue to build out Roku, and Roku was heavily gaining traction. So much so that in 2012, Woods would get an offer from a pretty large and well-known tech company, Intel. But Woods just wasn't interested in selling. In fact, he would give Intel a number, but it would be so large and ridiculous that he knew they wouldn't take it. It was around $1.5 billion. So today, Roku has continued its mission to be the operating system of the TV. If you've ever owned a Roku TV, I'm sure you're familiar with Roku City. You know that little city that you see when you've paused the TV for too long? Now, Roku hasn't escaped its challenges. In 2023, Roku was amongst the many companies that were affected by the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, where nearly $500 million of its cash was held up. But just like in Woods' normal fashion, Roku would bounce back and is moving in a pretty healthy direction these days. So this is Anthony Woods. This is the man that changed the way we consume television forever. He's the reason you binge watch. Well, now that you know who's responsible for your binge watching, if you want to know the potential reason your electric bill is so high, click on this next video. And as always, like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications to catch the next video.